When I was a kid, I never went to a shop. I never went to a restaurant. Suddenly you're given all this money, and I realized that what I thought I wanted as a kid was to be rich. And I realized now that what I really wanted was just not to be poor. That's what it was. And then once I wasn't poor anymore, it meant I had to kind of reassess everything. What do I actually want from life?
Gary Stevenson was Citibank's most profitable trader in 2011. He made millions by betting on growing economic inequality. But he decided to leave a life where he was making millions to raise awareness around the inequality that he had become so aware of. He focuses on teaching people about wealth inequality and the economy.
I go to the street I grew up on, and it was always a poor street. It's right next to the railway. Small houses. It used to be families of 4 or 5. Now there's like 15 individual impoverished people living in those houses, sharing rooms. This is the transformation of our society away from a respectable, if sometimes difficult, middle-class life to broad mass poverty. I think one problem you have is these two sides, they don't get to see each other. I didn't work with anyone who knew that the poverty was happening. And, I go to the streets, they don't know these guys are making $2 million a year. So the poor don't know that the rich are taking everything. And the rich don't see that the poor are struggling to eat.
Hey everyone, it's Erica. I've prepared something special for you. I want to invite you to my one-of-a-kind 5-day challenge where I'll be sharing how you, along with thousands of others, can start investing with confidence. You're probably thinking, Erica, I've never invested into the stock market, or I don't have a ton of money lying around. But that's exactly why I created this challenge for you. It doesn't matter if you have lots of money to start with or next to nothing. You'll discover easy and fun ways to start generating passive income, multiply your money, and create a future of financial independence without the guesswork, complexity, or risk when it comes to investing. The challenge starts soon, so secure your spot by clicking the link below. And by the way, this challenge is completely free. So click the link below or go to erica.com/invest. Now let's get back to the episode. I'm Erica Kohlberg, and you're listening to the Erica Taught Me podcast. You didn't have the typical path to becoming a trader, did you?
No, I think in many ways, I was not the typical trader. I grew up in East London, in a very poor neighborhood and a very poor family. There's actually a kind of stereotype in London finance of the sort of Cockney wide boy, barrow boy trader. But the truth is nowadays, and even when I was a trader 10 years ago, almost everyone is from wealthy families, wealthy backgrounds. But in London, we have 2 financial centers. We have the City of London in the center, and we have Canary Wharf, which is actually in East London. So when I was a kid, sort of 9 or 10, we actually saw this new financial district being built, and we saw these skyscrapers like going up on the end of the street. And I think we all kind of dreamed that one day we would be working in there. And, when I was a kid, I was very, very good at maths. I've still got a little trophy in my front room, some competition I won when I was 12 or 13. And I think if you grow up poor in London, being good at maths, you just think this is where we're going to go. Finance is the big job. It's there on the end of the doorstep. And I just thought, I'll work hard, I'll do the maths, and I'll end up, in some big skyscraper making fancy money. It didn't go as simply as that. You've probably seen in my book that when I was 16, I got expelled from school for what I usually call a drug-related incident. But even when that happened, it didn't really I always thought I'll get through this because I had this really strong confidence in my maths ability. And it pulled me through, I had to sort of study at home, sitting on the floor doing my maths homework because I didn't have school to go to. But I killed my exams and I managed to get into LSE, the London School of Economics, which for those who don't know is a very fancy finance school basically in London. And it's a bit of a crazy place. Like it's where Gaddafi sent his kids, the Libyan dictator. It's a lot of international money, wealthy families sending their kids there. And when I went there, I just thought, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to kill all the exams, we're going to kill all the maths exams, and then we'll get a job. But once again, it wasn't quite as simple as that. And where did you study? What university did you go to?
I went to Notre Dame for undergrad and Georgetown Law for law school.
Okay, so I don't know if you had a similar experience, but I thought you just go in. I was told when I was a kid, you study hard, you do well in your exams, you get a good job. But what actually happened was I studied hard, I did well in my exams. And then suddenly, second year of this economics maths degree at LSE, everybody became obsessed with banking and they started talking this other language. They started talking about M&As and CDOs and CDSs and IBD. Everything was a 3-letter acronym, I don't know why. And they started applying for internships. And they were applying for literally 30 internships each. And I just didn't know how to do any of this, and so I spoke to a friend and he was like, well, you have to write 30 CV and cover letters. And that's when I realized all of these guys, they'd been being prepped for this from 6, 7 years old. You know, they'd all played the oboe at the Royal Albert Hall. They'd all like dirt biked through the Sahara Desert for charity. They were members of the Junior United Nations. And me, when I was that age, I was trying to like start a rap group. You know, like, I was fluffing pillows at a sofa store because I needed to pay my university fees, you know? So I was like really depressed actually, because it was like, I thought it's not fair, you know? Like I'm like, I was one of the best kids in my course. I was killing the exams. And yet I wasn't going to get in because I didn't have this background stuff. It's kind of like there's a wall basically.
Yeah.
And unless you're from that rich background, you can't get in. So I just thought what I'm going to do is I'm going to just be big. I'm going to be really loud. I'm going to kill all the exams. I'm going to make sure everybody knows who I am. Bizarrely, that worked. And one day I was sitting in the library, London School of Economics library, doing my maths homework. And some guy who I never met before came up and was like, "You Gary Stevenson?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Citibank hires one trader a year through a card game, which is a maths game." He just briefly explained the game to me. And he was like, "You know, you should enter it. If you win, you'll get a job." And then he walked off. And LSE is this kind of place. But for me, you know, I was always good at maths. I was always good at games. I was always good at competitions. And it felt to me like, well, here's a game, you know, here's a fair game and we can do it. And I went to that competition and it was a maths game and I won it. I got to the national final and I won that. And then suddenly that meant that when I was 21, even when I was 20, I was on the Citibank trading floor doing like trading internships that got me the summer internship and I got the job that way. But what was crazy about it was I hadn't done any of this prep. I hadn't done any of this memorizing the words, memorizing the language. I was literally a kid from down the road who happened to be good at maths. And I think it works really well for the book because it really means I was someone who knew nothing about that world. And now you can kind of see it through the eyes of someone who knows nothing. You know, even Michael Lewis is kind of he knows that space and he's using that language. But really, you get the chance to see it as, I'm a kid who doesn't know anything about this world, doesn't know the language, walks in and sees all this mad stuff. So yeah, that's how I got the job.
And that was the internship while you were still in school, right? And
That
then
was
the
the
internship would
internship.
lead to the full-time offer.
Yeah, so that got me a 2-week internship. And I requested to have the first week straight away because it also got me an interview for the summer internship. So I just went in straight away and I just said hello to everyone on the floor so that when I had my interviews for the summer internship, it would definitely be people that I'd met. And then they all knew me. So they got me to the summer internship. The summer internship, I was insane. The summer internship had 3 trading competitions in the grad scheme and I won all of them. And it even had one public speaking competition and I won that. And all I can say is like, when I was a kid, I was very, very competitive. I'm an old man now and I'm more relaxed. But you know, I was a poor kid, you know. I've been sleeping on a broken mattress for 20 years, you know, and I didn't want to do that. And I knew I was as good as these guys. So for me, I was gonna make sure I got it. So yeah, 2 1-week internships led to the summer internship. And that got me the full-time job.
So you secure the internship. How then do you secure the job?
Okay, so I had these 2 1-week internships and the first week I just met everyone on the floor. That was the credit desk, which is one of the desks that blew the world up later on. My career didn't go that way. Then I had this internship on the STIRT desk, which is the short-term rates trading desk, which is basically where the vast majority of this story is told. And so STIRT, short-term interest rates trading, is quite interesting in the sense that up until 2008, it had become like a really like unfashionable backwater of trading. Citigroup, as it is today, is a merger of Citibank and Salomon. And Salomon is this fancy big money world that was written about by Michael Lewis in Liar's Poker. And Citibank is a much more like prosaic, just like money management thing. And STIRT was in the Citibank side. It had a reputation as like not making any money. So up till 2008, you know, younger people won't remember, but before 2008, everybody wanted to work in credit. These guys were making a ton of money. They're making super complicated things. They're making loads of stuff. And because I had a maths background, people kind of thought Gary's going to go work in credit. But I got this place on the STIRT desk. Because it was so unfashionable, it was a bunch of older guys. Like they hadn't managed to like hire many young guys. And the younger guys who'd come in are kind of the guys who'd failed to get jobs on the other desk, kind of like the rejects or like. So as the older guys, there was a guy there who'd never went to university from Liverpool, worked his way up from being like a cashier at a local bank. There was a guy there from Australia who used to be like a top level rugby player who'd gotten in through connections. And there were a bunch of kind of social weirdos who had not been popular enough to get other good desks. And when I went there, I actually felt much more at home because they were like, the other desks were just this sort of new breed of young money, slick back hair, expensive shirts. Whereas here there were people from places with accents. I kind of liked it. And I just sort of offered to buy people their lunch because that's what I was doing at the sofa store I worked at. I was like, hey, you want me to get your lunch? So I was like doing lunch runs for these guys. And if they loved it. They loved this like little cockney guy from down the road buying them lunch. And they would ask me every day to get like more and more complicated lunch orders. And then on the last day, the head of the desk was like, today you're going to buy lunch for everyone on the floor. And he asked me to like buy lunch for everyone. So I ended up buying like 100 burgers and carrying them back and forth. And then when I came back, I was just like exhausted. And he was like, did you have a passport? I was like, yeah. He goes, all right, go get your passport. You're going skiing. He sent me home to go on this ski trip. And I was like texting my dad, where's my passport? And then they took me skiing. And these guys, I didn't really realize at the time, but I think they kind of like fell in love with me in a way. And I think this stuff, I was like 20 years old. I didn't realize. But kids from my sort of background, my sort of voice, local kids from the area don't appear in this place. And I think they saw, it's what they want finance to be. They want finance to be young kids, like going for it, like really like the local talent. And they were like, we want this guy. And they made a really hard pitch for me, like, we want to hire you to this desk. And my mates at LSE were like, don't work in that area. It's unfashionable. But they said to me, if you work on this desk, we'll let you trade from day one. And the way it worked back then, I think still now, is you have to go on like a graduate scheme, 6 months of training, a year of training, 18 months rotations. Then you get a desk. You're not really trading for 3 years until you start. These guys were like, you can trade from day one. And I was so confident as a kid. I was like, that's all I want. If they can let me trade from day one, I'll kill it. And I mean, I was right, because within a few years, I was a top trader at the bank, basically. So I hired to this desk, the third desk, unpopular desk. 2008 happened. Suddenly, they are the most profitable desk on the entire floor because they're making short-term loans. And after the credit crisis, nobody can get short-term loans. So suddenly, these guys have all the money. So I end up in this kind of mad desk with a bunch of madmen who have been unpopular for years. Nobody's been listening to them. And suddenly they're like the kings of the trading floor. And I was just like scuffling around trying to figure out how they were making their money. But yeah, that's how I did my internship. And that's how I ended up getting the full-time job.
Did you want the money or the success more? What was really your driving motivation?
That is a really good question, because if you asked me when I was 18, 19, 20, I would have told you the money. I would have said, definitely what I want is the money. I want money. Because you know what? I was poor. I was real poor. I was like skipping meal poor. And I think if you ask any 19-year-old who's that level of poor what they want, they're going to tell you they want money. But the weird thing was, like, what I wanted was to be making like 60, 70 grand a year, which back then to me was, I couldn't imagine that. Then when I saw how much money the guys were making, it blew my mind and I couldn't believe it. It was actually like almost upsetting to me. And then within like a couple of years, I was a multimillionaire by 25. And then once I had that money, it didn't make me happy. This is so cliche thing to say, but like, I didn't even know how to spend money. So I got given loads of money and I bought this flash new apartment. I didn't even know, like, where do you buy a table? Where do you buy a sofa? How do you choose a sofa? When I was a kid, I never went into a shop. I never went into a restaurant. Suddenly you're given all this money. And I realized that what I thought I wanted as a kid was to be rich. And I realize now that what I really wanted was just not to be poor. That's what it was. And then once I wasn't poor anymore, it meant I had to kind of reassess everything. What do I actually want from life?
What was your relationship with your parents like, and how did they talk to you about money or the lack of?
Religious Mormons. And there's a concept in Mormonism of the straight and narrow path and the great and spacious building, which is like, the straight and narrow path is the difficult path of righteousness, and the great and spacious building is the temptations of the world. So I think when I got expelled from school for selling drugs at 16 and then became like a very successful banker, I think they had some concerns perhaps about that. I'm not religious anymore. I stopped going to church when I was very young. And I think this is something interesting perhaps about maybe something that's different between British and American culture. My mom's family is Italian and they're a migrant family. My dad's family is very traditionally, typically like English working class. There's this comedy sketch we have, it's an old comedy sketch, which rich person says, I am working class. I look down on him because he's middle class. I am middle class. I look up to him because he's upper class. I look down on him because he's working class. And the working class person says, I'm working class. I know my place. And I think there's this sense in traditional British working class culture, like, for example, in Dickens, in Great Expectations, like if you're poor and you try to get rich, only bad things will come of it. So I think my parents were a little bit worried about just where I was going, what I was doing. It didn't really tie down with their values. But I think at the same time, they were proud of how successful I was. I think more than anything, where they are now is confused. I think they're confused to see their son become a very successful trader and then become a YouTuber, become a campaigner, now become an author. I've taken a few different paths. And
If you've listened to some recent episodes of this podcast, you'll have heard me talk about Hostinger and their incredibly easy to use website creation services. I actually did a walkthrough to set up a website and it took me less than 5 minutes. So right now, I'm going to take you through the basic steps, and I highly recommend you give Hostinger a try, whether you're looking to start a side hustle and need a website, or you want to find a way to stand out in the job market with an online CV. They've got you covered. Start by going to hostinger.com/Erica10 and selecting your preferred package. I recommend the 12-month as you get the best deal. You go to payment, and this is where you add code ERICA10, ERIKA 10, for a great deal. Once you're logged in, you can claim your free domain if you want. I'm going straight to the AI builder. Enter your brand name, what type of website you're creating, and this is the important bit. Describe your site in a few keywords and be as descriptive as you can. Click Create Website, and Hostinger's AI will generate everything your site needs: header, footer, contact form, images, social icons. If there's anything you don't like or need, you can then use their drag and drop feature to customize the website to your liking. You can even use their AI writer to generate SEO-friendly copy. But that's not all. Your website also includes an e-commerce solution, so you're ready to start selling whenever you want to. Plus, you've got access to 24/7 customer support if you need it. So if you want to take your side hustle to the next level, or simply build an online presence to supercharge your career, you can head to hostinger.com/Erica10 and get an extra 10% off with code Erica10. That's hostinger.com/Erica10. Erica is always with a K. I'll put the link in the description as well. And now back to the episode. Any specific advice they've given you about how to navigate these chapters of life that you've been through? The trader, the YouTuber, the author, the campaigner?
they're not big on really giving advice. I always remember, so, I was very talented kid in school, and I would always get the best grades. And I would always text my dad, I got these grades. And he would always text back the same thing: well done. And that was it. And I've always backed myself. And I think my parents have always had a lot of faith in me. Probably my sister's been more sort of supportive on the way. But I think one thing that I always remember, when I went to LSE, I thought LSE would be full of geniuses because it's a very prestigious university. It's not. It's full of kids with very rich parents. And if I'm going to be honest, LSE was quite easy for me. And I just got my first girlfriend first year of LSE. So I spent my whole time back in Ilford, my hometown in East London, like messing around. And I didn't really study very hard. And I got like a good grade in my first year. And I spoke to a friend of mine, really nice guy, he's mentioned in the book. And his family owns like the entire East African soap industry. I noticed after my first year that suddenly everybody was like paying me a lot of attention. And I said to this guy, why is everybody paying me attention? And he goes, because of your exam grades. And my exam grades were good, but they weren't, his grades were better. I said to him, but your grades were better. And he said, yeah, but nobody expects that from you. And that's when I sort of realized, because if you ask my friends, if you ask my family, if you ask my parents, if you ask my sister, what do you expect, Gary? They would all say he's going to be a millionaire. Because they saw me from young, smart, hungry, ambitious, energetic. But it's actually these guys from richer backgrounds that were surprised. And that's when I realized something which stayed with me a lot, which is that a lot of people from richer backgrounds think that people from smarter backgrounds are stupid. And people sometimes ask me, like, if you're rich, why do you dress like you dress? Why do you talk like you talk? And I remember people, when I was a kid, saying, if you want to be successful, you've got to change your voice. For me, if I was to change how I dress, change how I talk, change how I look, it's not worth being successful. Because I want to show people that kids from my background, and you don't need to be from London, you could be from anywhere. You could be from a poor background in the States, anywhere. There are smart kids in these places. And the reason they don't get in is because the system is not there for them. So I think a lot of people have influenced me. I think in many ways I do it for my parents, but not just my parents, everyone from where I'm from. And that could be in London, that could be in Scotland, that could be, that could be in Alabama. Anyone from a place where people think people from that place who sound like that, who look like that, are not successful. I want to show, like, look, we're as good as anyone.
No, I think the power to want to prove something to yourself, to people who are doubting you, to people who would look up to you if you're successful is so strong. I feel very driven by that too. Like, I always want to, I don't know. I also feel like I want to prove that you don't have to come from a fancy background to be successful in this world.
Yeah, I want people to know that. When I was a kid, so we're talking in London, I'm from East London, which is the poorest part of London, probably now and historically. When I was a teenager, grime music just started. You know grime music?
No.
Grime music is a London originated like kind of rap genre. And a lot of guys came through that were from very close to where I'm from. Dizzy Rascal, Wiley, these guys like from very close to where I'm from. And I remember up until then, we were watching US hip hop and it was all guys like popping champagne into swimming pools. And this was not my life, you know what I mean? So to see a bunch of guys coming from where I'm from, sounding like where I'm sounding and feeling like they had life like my life, it meant so much to me. And that's why like, I don't want to change the way that I talk. I always remember David Beckham is from East London, from Leighton. And, you know, we don't pronounce our T's. And I remember when David Beckham made it famous, the guy started pronouncing his T's. It broke my heart. You know, and for me, I want to be like people from where I'm from because that's where I'm from. And I want to show those people, as well as richer people, that there is talent and there is ability. And yeah, because it means a lot to me.
Can you just take it back a little and explain very simply how STIRT works? How do they make money?
Okay, so STIRT stands for short-term interest rate trading. Whenever you hear interest rate trading, you should hear loans. Interest rate trading is loans, making loans, borrowing and lending of money. And the idea is you want to borrow money at a low interest rate and lend it back at a high interest rate. So short-term interest rates is just doing that, short-term loans of largely up to 1 year, sometimes up to 2 years. A lot of what STIRT desks do is literally 1 day loans. Bond is a form of a loan, but they're doing sort of 10-year bonds, 10-year loans. STIRT desk, 1 year loans, 6-month loans, 3-month loans, 1 day loans, a ton of 1 day loans. So if you're like a corporation and you want to borrow money for 2 years, there's a few ways you can do it. You can go to a bank and you can say, lend us money for 2 years. Or you can go every day and borrow money 1 day at a time. And a lot of people do this 1 day at a time. So it's very high volume business, but it's not very sexy, right? Like, because everybody knows what the rate is today. But it's simple things like, what's the Fed or the Bank of England going to do next week? What's the interest rate going to be in 2 weeks' time? So 2008, or just to address your question quickly, in 2008, one big thing that happened was the market for loans dried up. Now on STIRT, we did a thing called foreign exchange swaps, which is a kind of collateralized loan, which is I lend you euros, you lend me dollars. So it's low risk because I've got your dollars. It's not an unsecured loan. And suddenly after 2008, nobody would do unsecured loans. So these FX swaps, these secured loans, were basically the only game in town. So everybody needed this product to get their dollars, especially Citibank as an American bank had dollars. One big thing that happened after 2008 was nobody outside the US could get US dollars. So for us, as the STIRT desk, making short-term secured loans, which are the lowest risk form of loans in dollars, we were basically the only guys providing dollars to the rest of the world. So it was very, very profitable for a short period of time. But I wanted to go quickly to basically my big trade that made me a lot of money is a STIRT trader, because I think it explains how STIRT trading works and how I made money from it basically, which is in 2008, all of the base rates went to zero. Now, if you study economics, the theory tells you that should cause like a very powerful economic stimulus. And everybody thought 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, because of that powerful stimulus, we're going to get a big economic bounce back and rates will come up very quickly. So if you're sitting in 2010, rates are zero, and you want to borrow money next year, even though rates are zero, it's going to cost you 2% because everybody thinks rates are going to go up. Now, I reached the belief that rates would stay zero for a long time, which meant I just went out and I lent everybody money at 2%. And I know that if I wait long enough, the base rate will still be zero. I can borrow it back at zero. If you lend $1 billion out at 2%, you borrow it back at zero, you make 2% on $1 billion, which is what? 100 million, 10 million, $20 million. Make sense?
That was your big trade.
That was my big trade, yeah.
And what edge did you have? How did you come to the conclusion that it was going to stay at zero?
This is a big question, basically. The period between 2008 and 2019 is super interesting, right? Because every single point in those 11 years, if you were to ask an economist, when will rates go back up? They would have said next year. And they were wrong every single year. In the UK, they did briefly go up in the US, but they came down again. And then in 2020, when COVID happened, finally everybody agreed rates will never go up again. And then obviously they went up to 5%. So if you look at the recent history of predicting interest rates, economists are unbelievably bad at it. We're almost always wrong at predicting interest rates. So I was sitting there 2008 and I saw this crash happen nobody expected. Then everybody says 2009 massive recovery, didn't happen. Everybody says 2010 massive recovery, didn't happen. And I'm sitting there like end of 2010, looking around all these millionaires who are wrong all the time. And I'm thinking, this is my chance here. You know, these guys are idiots, basically. If I can figure out why they're always wrong, then there's money in it for me, right? So the big question of that period of why rates didn't go up is, why are people not spending money? The reason that low rates are supposed to stimulate an economy is because they make it cheap for you to borrow. They make it cheap for companies to borrow. They make it pointless to save. So spend, spend, spend. So people should have been spending 2009, 10, 11. Why didn't they? I ask people, why, like traders on the floor, why do you think people are not spending money? And they're like, oh, it's because of the credit crisis. Recently, I went to Oxford University. I asked the professor, why do you think people are not spending money? He told me it was an exogenous shock to consumption savings preferences. I'm not quite sure what that means, but this is what people were thinking at the time. And I basically thought, and this is where I think I was actually very much in some ways advantaged by coming from a poor background. I just went and asked people, why do you not spend money? Why do you not spend more money? And you can imagine what they said, right? Everybody said, I don't spend more money because I don't have any more money. That's why I don't spend more money. And I didn't want to take that face value, right? So I started to look into the financial situation of my friends, my family, and my friends' families. What I saw everywhere was parents who owned property and kids who had never owned property. So what that tells you is your average British family, and I don't think it's that different in the US, your average British or American family is going over time from being a property owning family to a non-property owning family. Does it make sense to turn around to a family that is losing the only asset they have over time and say, why don't you spend more money? It doesn't make any sense. These guys that we know for certain that they're spending more than their income generationally year after year because they're losing their homes. But I remember thinking these guys are losing their homes, they're going into debt. But it doesn't make sense. Where are the homes going? Who are they going in debt to? And then early 2011, I got called into a meeting at Citibank. We used to have a weekly economics meeting. There was one good economist there who I rated quite a lot. And he walked us through the financial situation of Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Ireland, but also the UK, the US, Japan. In every case, what you saw was governments going into debt, spending more than their income, losing their assets. And I came out of this meeting and I couldn't help but see this symmetry between my friends and their families and the world's biggest governments. In every case, spending more than their income, going into debt, losing their assets. And it's impossible, right? Everybody can't lose their assets simultaneously and everybody can't go into debt simultaneously. Somebody has to own the assets. Somebody has to own the credit on the debt. And I was kind of thinking, who is it? And I was sitting there and I remember I used to have to bring the burgers to that meeting. So I was sitting there surrounded by hamburgers on my desk and just looking to the people around me and a bunch of idiot millionaires. And I just realized it's us, isn't it? It's us. We are the guys who are getting richer when the world is losing their homes. We are the guys who own Italy's government debt. We are the guys with money in the bank. We are the guys with the assets. And I realized as we get richer and richer, they will get poorer and poorer. And I realized there was no dynamic opposing that. I realized that. And having studied economics, nobody was talking about it. I realized this is inevitable, the path that we will take now, which is the middle class will lose their homes. The middle class will fall into debt. Governments will lose their assets. Governments will fall into debt. The rich and the super rich will get richer and richer and richer, which means these people who aren't spending now will never be able to spend. They will get poorer and poorer. And I knew straight away what that meant. It meant I had to buy green euro dollars, which is a bet on the interest rate. So I knew that it meant that interest rates couldn't recover because the spending power of the people couldn't recover. I think I had access to real people, which I think most traders nowadays don't because they're from rich families, rich schools, completely rich backgrounds. But I think secondly, I was able and willing to step back from just the textbook economics and look around at the world and ask what's happening. And I think nowadays, people who study economics is a very, very, very heavily mathematized degree and they just want numbers. But I think if you take a step back and you look at what's happening, you can see every ordinary person knows that ordinary families are losing their homes. Governments are clearly being bankrupted. Wealth inequality is clearly going through the roof. That's gonna keep happening. And I think that, for me, the one edge that I had from that moment, and which has always been very profitable for me trading, is I understand that inequality will increase. I understand what that means for ordinary families, and I understand what that means to the economy. And it's not a complicated thing, but it's very monetizable because economists don't know it and they don't talk about it. From the beginning of COVID, the US government has given out more than $2 trillion. Sorry, more than $3 trillion since the beginning of COVID. It's tens of thousands of dollars per family. It's overwhelmingly pooled with richer families. If anyone did the analysis at the beginning of COVID, you could have seen inequality will explode during COVID. And the first ever YouTube video I made, the reason I made the YouTube channel, is because I wanted to tell people inequality is about to explode. You need to be ready for this. Anybody could have seen that, but most economists simply do not think about inequality. They do not think about distribution. So that's, first of all, it's terrible for our societies and for our future because it means they're not going to fix it. And secondly, for me, it has been a massive edge in markets because it's in my opinion, it's dominated what's happened. I was able to predict the cost of living crisis. I was able to predict the increase in house prices and the increase in stock markets because I understood the inequality effects of COVID. So for me, really, in my opinion, the art of trading, it's not about being right. It's about being right when other people are wrong. And it's about seeing the important things that other people miss. The economy as it exists right now, there is one massive, massive, hugely important thing driving everything, which is hardly ever spoken about, which is the growth in wealth inequality and the loss of wealth of governments in the middle class. And if you understand that, then you can trade very profitably. And I do trade very profitably, but I think it also should force us to ask, what does that mean for our society? What does that mean for our future? And what should we do about it?
With this edge that you have, knowing about this growth in income inequality, do you feel some sort of obligation to help reduce that or change it? And do you think there is a solution?
I mean, for me, it's not about obligation, right? It goes back to this. If you see a terrible thing happening, do you try and stop it? Inequality was getting worse anyway before COVID. The amount that wealth inequality increased during COVID is insane. And once you start that, it creates a momentum of itself. So in COVID, the richest families accumulated hundreds and thousands. The average US billionaire doubled their wealth in the first year of COVID, right? You see this enormous increase in wealth, cash accumulation by richer people. What are they going to do with that money? Rich people, they're not going to spend it, right? They'll spend a bit of it for sure, but they're going to mainly use that to buy assets. Where are the assets going to come from? The struggling people hanging on to the middle class, right? So once you give them that money, they use that money to buy the rest of the assets, which then means ordinary families, their kids don't get homes. And if they do get homes, they have to get massive mortgages, which they're borrowing from the rich, which means more rent payments, more interest payments. It means government is in debt to the rich, more interest payments, higher taxes for ordinary people going to the rich. So once that momentum starts, it will continue. So for me, my background is maths. I'm looking at this as a mathematician. I'm saying, where does this go? What this goes to is the massive impoverishment. The reason that the US is a rich country, the UK is a rich country, is because they have large, prosperous middle classes. If you go to a place like India, they don't have that. If you go to the 50th percentile in the US, it's getting worse, but it still has a decent standard of living. You go to India, it's extreme poverty, and that is what happens if you don't protect your middle class. So for me, I don't come from a rich background. My family is not rich. My friends are not rich, right? And I see what's happening to their lives. And I know that that's just the beginning and that it will get worse. So for me, it's not about obligation. It's just, do you want the world to be terrible or not? And that I'm somebody who is fortunate enough that I have the time and the money that I can devote some energy to trying to stop this. And I think because I'm from that background, an ordinary background, I think I can speak to those people and I want to try and stop it. And whether I do or not, I don't know. But, that's what I want to do with my life.
So what do you say to your friends, your family who don't come from money? I mean, I imagine you're not going to them and saying, it's going to get worse for you.
Yeah, this is a tricky thing. I went to like a friend's birthday party the other day. He's like 50, but one of his like young nephews was there. And he's saying to me, what do I do? How do I make money like you did? And of course, like loads of people ask me these questions and they say, teach me how to trade, this kind of thing. And actually, at the beginning of COVID, I put out these videos and I wrote some articles saying house prices are going to go up, which they have done, which they did do significantly. And a couple of friends of mine came to me like, hey, but I haven't got a house. And they're sitting on like 50, 60 grand deposits. They're saving up. They can't afford to buy a house. If house prices go up, it's terrible for them, right? They're like, what can you do? What can I do to protect myself? And I personally, when COVID happened, I knew asset prices would go through the roof. And I was sitting on bonds before COVID because before COVID, the US had a briefly high interest rates, which were coming down. And it was just my classic trade, bet on interest rates coming down. So I had these bonds and they went up. And I wanted to get into gold because I thought gold price will go through the roof. And early on COVID, gold spiked and then it collapsed. And I couldn't believe it. And I bought like $1 million of gold. And I've made a ton of money on that trade, right? And my friends say, what can I do? And I just perhaps naively said, oh, well, if you want, you can do what I'm doing, which is what I've done is I've opened a trading account and I bought a ton of gold. You can do that if you want. And they both went and they did this. Gold price went up, making money. gone up like 20%. And then
So they're happy with you at that point.
yeah, but then it had a little spike down. It maybe dropped 5%. It's up something like 15, 20% and down 5%. Both my friends call me up like, what do I do? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? To do anything. You can buy a bit more if you want. And they're like, you don't understand. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm out. I've lost all my money. And I was like, how? It's gone up 20% and down 5%. How have you managed to lose money? And they both did the same thing, which was, first of all, they didn't buy gold. They wait, it goes up 5%, and they're like, oh, I should have bought it. It goes up another 5%, now they buy it. So they missed the first 10% straight away. Then it goes up another 5%, and they're like, oh, this is good, we'd buy a bit more. Then it goes up another 5%, and then suddenly they have this moment where they realize that they themselves are geniuses, and they buy platinum, and they buy palladium, and they buy Tesla, and they buy Bitcoin, and they buy everything, right? And they've gone mad, they've lost their heads, and then everything's fallen at once, and they've lost all their money. And that is when I realized, like, don't try and teach people to trade. And to be honest, I don't think that ordinary people sitting on sort of ordinary sums of money, $20,000, $30,000, should be trying to trade. I think you should be trying to invest. But I don't think you should be trying to be time the markets perfectly in this kind of thing. Because ultimately, you want to beat the markets. You want to beat me. And I've been doing this every day for years. You know, I was waking up at 5 a.m. for 6 years. I was doing this every day, hours a day, studying for this. You know what I mean? Are you going to beat me? You know what I mean? If somebody came to you and said, hey, listen, I think I'm going to beat Usain Bolt at the Olympics next year. You know what I mean? Listen, I ain't saying I'm Usain Bolt, but I was one of the best in the world at this for a period of time. Trading is a competitive market. You know, you're not going to watch a couple of YouTube videos and become the best trader in the world. So for me, it puts me in this weird position because people come and ask me, how do I make money? And listen, there's sensible things you can do. And I know that you give people sensible advice, there's sensible things that you can do. But the truth is, there's only so much you can do to protect yourself if the whole system is collapsing. If you come to me with $100,000, $200,000, maybe there's a few things you can do. But most people don't even have that. So like, what I want to tell people is, you need to protect yourselves from a collapsing system. And the way to do that is to unite and work together to fix the game in your favor. You know, my parents lived in a generation where most people, if you worked hard, you could live something like a good life. I come from East London. I grew up, it's a very Pakistani area. These guys came over 30, 40 years ago, very poor. They worked hard, running shops, cleaning, and now they own houses. You know what I mean? That was possible then. But we're moving into a world where that's increasingly less possible. And if you don't fight against that, who's going to protect your kids and grandkids? You know, and I know people don't like to be political, but what I say to people is, look, if you don't do politics, they're going to do it anyway. And the system is becoming harder and harder for ordinary people as the rich are getting richer and richer. We don't do anything to push back against that. You know, are you going to, first you have to fight to be in the top 10%, the top 5%, the top 2%, and then the top 1%. You know, eventually you'll be squeezed out. It's kind of like a Squid Game situation here where I see all of these people from poor backgrounds struggling against each other while the game is getting harder and harder. And listen, I understand it because I was the same. If you come to me 18, 19 years old and say you need to fix the system to make it fairer, I'm going to get lost, mate. I'm going to take care of myself. The truth is, ordinary people are in a difficult situation here, but they have one big power, which is that there's a lot of them. And if they unite and work together, they can push back to change the rules of this system so that wealth stops flowing out of the middle class to the rich and starts flowing back in the other direction. If they don't do that, then they're fighting against the tide. So I think I'm always in this kind of tricky situation where how do you convince people that the best way to protect their interests is to work together? Because we live in such an individualistic society and it's hard. You know, people want to, when you can't even take care of yourselves, how are you going to take care of others? But the truth is, I think the best weapon that ordinary people have in the game that's happening now is strength in numbers. And if they're unwilling to unite, then it's like you're going into battle and you're not using your only weapon. So I'm trying to kind of move people into a space where, of course, take care of yourself, do what you can, like to take care of yourself and your family. So I think I'm always trying to balance this line, and we do offer some sort of financial advice. And I know you're offering financial advice on your channel.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you ever said, I wish I had more time, or there's just not enough time? I used to say this constantly. I felt like I was always rushing, desperately trying to fit everything and everyone in, trying to do 10 hours worth of work in 6 hours, and feeling exhausted with no time for something that was really important, myself.
I made a conscious decision to change, to review what was actually important versus what I told myself was important. It's still a work in progress, but I make time to step away, whether I take a walk, put my phone on Do Not Disturb for 2 hours, or simply relax at home. Therapy can be a great place to understand our priorities and remove the guilt we so often feel about putting ourselves first. You can also learn how to set and effectively communicate your boundaries so that your me time can be uninterrupted and fulfilling however you choose to spend it. I've been using BetterHelp for a while now, and one of the things I've found most useful is how flexible and convenient it is. My schedule can be hectic, so being entirely online really works. You can also try different therapists to find the right fit for you. I've switched therapists 4 times to find the right person for me. Give it a try and learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/ETM today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/ETM. I'll put the link in the description. So when you talk about the difference between a retail investor, just someone investing $1,000 that they have versus you, a professional trader who was one of the top in the world, is the big difference controlling emotion? Or is it access to more data that you have? Is it that you're spending more time on it?
This is a good question. So when we had the big like Bitcoin craze, crypto craze, which is still existing, but it's dying down now. I had a few friends get sucked into it and lose quite a bit of money, and I was quite worried about it. And I reached out to a guy who I know who runs like a gambling charity, like a former gambling addict. And it's a sports gambling thing. But I said to him, you had any guys coming through with like crypto problems? And he was like, tons. They are flying in. Guys are losing their money left, right, and center. First of all, I think that's interesting because, like, you know, those guys aren't posting on Instagram, right? You know, the guys with the Ferraris posting on Instagram, but the guys are losing their shirts are not posting. And I was worried about him, man, because, you know, like a lot of my audience is the same kind of people who are doing this kind of thing. He said, do you want to come and give a talk? You know, can you come and give a talk and we can talk about it? And I went and I gave a talk about the difference between trading and investing. And what I started on was I messaged a guy, a former work colleague who used to work on the Citibank trading desk with. And I said, have you got any photos of me as a trader? And he sent me a photo of me wearing a hoodie next to like a cereal packet asleep on my desk. I remember thinking like, at that time, I was Citibank's best trader in the world, right? And I thought this is such a great thing to show people who want to do trading, because the images that you get, you know, there's a lot of scam channels out there. We're going to teach you to trade. And it's always like a flash suit guy, really like handsome guy, 6 screens. And, you know, there was me, top trader in the world, asleep on the desk. And I actually thought like, this is good actually, because this is kind of breaking the myth of what a trader does. You know, like I think what a lot of people are being sold is basically a roulette machine. You know, you go to the casino. I don't gamble, right? I've been to Vegas, right? You go to the casino. What's a slot machine? It's flashing lights, it's moving pictures, it's noise. And that is what people are being sold on trading platforms, right? Green numbers, red numbers. Yeah, buy, sell, sell, sell. That is not what good traders are doing. Good traders are not doing this day trading stuff, up, down, up, down. Good traders are trying to understand what the hell is happening in their market. And, you know, I make my money as a trader by understanding the economy. Not every trader does that, right? Some traders, they just know their specific market really well, the specific things that happen in that market, right? But that's their edge. My edge is knowing the market, right? My edge is knowing the economy. But I think what people are being sold is like a dream of trading, like a Wolf of Wall Street dream of trading. 6 screens, all of these numbers, red lights, up and down, buy, sell, day trading. I think the big thing for me is frequency. So I was a trader, top trader, right? I had the same trade on for 3 years. And I was a short-term rates trader. And all I was betting is that rates are going to come down for 3 years, same trade. I don't do this day trading stuff, in, out, you know. Day trading is for guys who, you know the market flow, like on the trading floor. You know what I mean? It's not for guys at home, and it's not for guys like me. Like what I know is the economy, that's medium-term stuff. So I think really like anyone who is sitting at home doing high-frequency day trading, stop. That's my opinion. Like high frequency, stop. Just don't do it. Like, what is your edge on high frequency stuff? But there's a book by Isaac Talib, Fooled by Randomness. Talks about how like if you look in the clouds, you'll see a face. I think like if you stare at these charts for long enough, you'll see something. Get rid of the charts. Put them away. Sensible long-term investing. The two things that are dead giveaways. You're doing it wrong as a non-professional. Frequency and length of time that you're holding that trade, basically. You should be putting things on. Oh, and the other one is the rate of return you expect.
Mm.
Like, I was one of the top traders in the world, right? If I make 10%, I'm doing well. 10% is a good return, right? And if you see someone on the internet saying we're going to give you 200%, turn that off, because that is fraud. It's con. There's no way you can make 200% unless you're doing something crazy. So like, listen, look at what's the base rate is, 5%, right? If you can beat that by a few percent, you're doing well as a non-professional. And that's what you should be targeting, right? You should be sensible, long-term trades, try and beat the base rate a little bit. If people are selling you 200% or even like 50%, like, turn it off.
Run.
No high frequency, hold it for a decent period of time. Don't check it every day. Target sensible returns. For me, you want to be viewing it as like gardening. You growing it slowly over time. And I know that's not a sexy message. And if you're coming at me with $20,000 and I'm saying, look, if you can make 8%, 8% of $20,000, $1,600 a year, it's not going to be life-changing, but it's better than losing all your money on Bitcoin, isn't it? So I think for an ordinary person, I would say no day trading, no high-frequency trading, long-term sensible investment. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but it's listen, my dad worked for Royal Mail, right? They deliver letters, right? 35 years. And for that, we was poor, but he had a house, he paid the mortgage off, 3 kids, he raised them. I know you can't do that no more. And I know that when you put young kids in a situation where getting an ordinary job doesn't work, where doing what their dad did doesn't work, then they're going to look for something that works, right? And they know that 7% is not going to make it for them. So they're looking for something crazy. So they're going for Bitcoin. So they're buying NFTs, this kind of stuff. I know. But you're grist for the mill, man. You're going to be taken advantage of. And it's not a sexy message, but it's true, and I see, because I've come out and I've been quite vocal against things like Bitcoin, I get the messages in my inbox from people, I've lost all my money on Bitcoin. They're not posting pictures on Instagram. They're messaging, I see them. And this guy that runs a gambling channel, he sees them. These guys are invisible. Nobody tells you they lost all their money on Bitcoin. It's happening all over the world. People are losing it. So we live in a world of get rich quick schemes, and they're often pimped out by a lot of people on Instagram standing next to Lamborghinis, and on YouTube as well. Yeah, stay away from them.
What have you seen that the wealthy are doing that is different from what other people are doing? I mean, the wealthy are not day trading their money. What are they doing to preserve their wealth?
The wealthy tend to long-term invest in a variety of assets. And the truth is, they try and minimize taxation. They try and avoid taxes because that's a very safe way of increasing your returns. They diversify. They buy a lot of things. They hold a lot of assets. So they'll have property, they'll have stocks and shares, they'll probably have some bonds as well. They'll try and reduce their taxes. Obviously, I'm not telling people necessarily try and reduce your taxes, but that is what they do. But the thing is, they always win because we have this kind of structural setup. So in my mind, when inequality increases, what do ordinary people buy? They buy stuff. They buy goods and services because they need them. They don't have much money and they need more stuff. Rich people have loads of money. When they get more money, they buy assets. So when inequality increases, demand for stuff, goods and services goes down, and demand for assets increases. So as inequality increases and increases and increases, asset prices just go up and up and up and up and up. And this is the big shift in markets in the last 20, 30 years. I think any big picture analysis has to be everything's gone up. You get some people talking about this on the internet, the everything bubble, but everything has gone up. Houses have gone up. Gold has gone up. People talk about the housing bubble. Everything's gone up. Stocks have overperformed housing. Most of the world. Gold has outperformed housing in most of the world. Land has outperformed housing. Everything has gone up because structurally we are making the rich richer. And what do the rich want? Assets. So everything has gone up. And then you can see there's this kind of power spiral, which is as the rich get richer, what do they want? They want the stuff rich people want. Well, who's got the stuff rich people want? The rich people. So the rich get richer and richer, and they end up sucking the assets away from the middle class. So it works very well for them, this diversified, hold everything, pay no taxes strategy. It bankrupts our government, and it takes assets away from the middle class. But it works for them. The problem is, the rich will target something like 7-8% return. That's now, right? Before, in a zero interest rate environment, they'll be looking for 3, 4, 5%. The rich will target like 7-8% return. And that's great. If you're coming at me with $5 million and you're making 8% return, you're making $400,000 a year. You can live on that. But if you're coming as an ordinary person with $50,000, it doesn't work. So this is the problem. The strategies that work for the rich because they're rich. But of course, ordinary people, they should invest sensibly. But I think unless they also protect their political interests, I think it's probably not going to be enough for a lot of families.
It's difficult because it's obvious that to get rich, you need to buy more assets. But as the rich are buying more assets, the price of assets go up. So then how is a person on an ordinary salary supposed to buy those assets?
Because, we live in a very divided economy, right? And there are some people that have assets, and there are a lot of people that don't have assets. And, people come to me, what can I do? What can I do? And poorer people, they want crazy trading strategies because they can't buy assets. And, people in the middle, they want investment strategies. But what I see is a bunch of ordinary people like fighting each other for crumbs while the rich are just making a fortune. The average US billionaire doubled their wealth in 1 year. In the UK, we've never seen bigger, faster increase in wealth of the rich. And I think if you think about it, we know now that inequality increased during COVID significantly. If I were to ask you a question, imagine we just pause the economy for a year. And in that period, we significantly increase inequality. What do you think will happen to ordinary people's living standards when we reopen? You would have to say they will fall, right? Which is exactly what happened, which is exactly what I predicted. And yet, very understandably, ordinary people just say, well, how can I protect myself? How can I protect myself? But if your class is being destroyed, it's very difficult to protect yourself. So I think there's this kind of crossover between investment and politics, which is investment works for rich people because they're rich. Politics can work for poor people because they are many. If you can convince poor to focus on investing instead of politics, that's great for the rich. Like imagine I walk into a room and I'm 10 times as strong as everyone in the room, but there's 1,000 of them. What do I want them to do? I want them to fight me one at a time. That is what I see in the world right now. I see poor people convinced that they have to play this game that they can't win against people who will definitely beat them, and convinced that they shouldn't play a game which they would definitely win, which is to unite and to say, we want wealth to flow from the rich to the many. But it's tricky. I grew up in this society and I was the same. When I was young, all I was thinking about was me, me, me. So I'm kind of trying to think, how do we convince people? It's an interesting space, right? Because I think the most selfish thing and the most self-interested thing that the poor could do right now is to unite and to tax the rich. That is the only thing that would actually protect them. But we've somehow convinced them that that's like stupid, maybe, because it's hard. We live in a very individualistic society. By investing, increasingly, there's a bottom 50% that have no assets. What do they do? And that 50% will become 60%, and that 60% will become 70%. So, and I know, it's good for me that channels like yours exist, right? Because if people come and say, you want financial advice? I can say, listen, go watch Erica. She'll tell you about financial advice. And I can say, but you need to do the politics as well. And I think I hope people can see it. I hope people can see that if you don't, go to India and look what it's like there, where you have everything is owned by 1%, 2%, and the vast majority live in poverty. That is where we can go. And it's easy to say, oh, well, we're America, we're the UK, it won't happen here. But, read Charles Dickens. It happened here. It happened here. It happened here in the UK. We lived in a country where the vast majority of people lived in desperate poverty. And, I go to the street I grew up on, and it was always a poor street. It's right next to the railway. Small houses. It used to be families of 4 or 5. Now there's like 15 individual impoverished people living in those houses, sharing rooms. This is the transformation of our society away from a respectable, if sometimes difficult, middle-class life to broad mass poverty. I think one problem you have is these two sides, they don't get to see each other. So once you go and I worked in the city, you worked in law. I didn't work with anyone who knew that poverty was happening. And, I go to the streets. They don't know these guys are making $2 million a year. So the poor don't know that the rich are taking everything. And the rich don't see that the poor are struggling to eat. In this country, the UK, more than 50% of the country struggled to feed and heat their families last winter. This is in the UK, 50%. If we don't do anything about it, that will get worse. And, you can try and get into the top 30%, the top 20%, the top 10%, How do you feel lucky? If you don't protect the distribution, if there is no middle class, we're not all going to be in the top 1%. So, yeah, I don't know where you sit with that. The way I see it is I take what I need and I give what I can. So everybody, I'm never going to turn around to a poor person and be like, listen, come support my YouTube channel because we need help. You do what you need to do to protect yourself, to protect your family. And I would do the same. But if you have some time and you have some energy, be willing to look and and share messages like mine and educate yourself and your friends and your family, because this fight ain't going away. I think ordinary people can see things are getting worse and worse and worse.
Look, I understand that systems need to be changed. I
Mhm.
get that. But at the same time, I think about, when a plane goes down, put your mask on first and then help others. It's not the
Yeah,
other way
yeah,
around, right? So
yeah,
systemic changes are going to take a while and a long
yeah.
time if they ever change. And so I find myself frustrated that
Mhm.
we don't have a solution.
For me, I think one thing that you can do is be very clear about what you're asking for. So what I ask for is a reduction in wealth inequality, ownership of assets. So this is about who is getting richer and who is getting poorer in terms of asset ownership. So in the last 20 years, we can pretty clearly see what's happening, which is ordinary families are having less ownership of assets. The government is getting much poorer. It's falling into debt, and the rich are getting richer. We need to put that in reverse. And the best way to measure that is in asset ownership of ordinary people. So we need to demand that ordinary people accumulate more assets. So in a way, it's very aligned with what you're doing, right? Because you have an investment channel, right? You talk about how the ordinary people accumulate assets. But if you exist in a tide where ordinary people in general are losing their assets, it is very difficult as an ordinary person to accumulate assets, because the tide's going one way off. You're trying to fight upstream. We know the current system, most people will get poorer asset terms year after year, generation after generation. I think generationally is the way to look at it, because people tend to get rich over the course of their life, but then their kids are poorer than them. We need to demand that assets flow towards ordinary families. So in a sense, it's about the housing crisis. Houses are not disappearing. London gets bigger and bigger every year. You go to my hometown now, it's 10 stories high. It's much bigger than it used to be when I was a kid. The assets are there, but ordinary people are not getting them. They have to be owned by somebody. They're owned by the rich. We need to demand reductions in wealth inequality. So I think the first thing you can have is a clear demand. But I totally understand what you're saying. This is not going to happen tomorrow. This is not going to happen tomorrow. And this is why, my message is sometimes hard to deliver, because in the short term, this gets worse. In the short term, this gets worse. And the message that I send to people is, number one, is build those connections of community. Build those connections with people around you, because we're all struggling. And I think if we all struggle as individuals, it's hard. People don't like to come out and say, financially I'm struggling, but increasingly more and more people are struggling. One message that I really want to send, and I think that is really important to send, is if you are financially struggling at the moment, you're making the right choices, you're trying not to overspend, you're trying to save, you're trying to invest, trying to get a good job, and you're still struggling. This is not your fault. This is a systemic problem. Many, many people are struggling. So get rid of those sense of embarrassment and shame, because I come from a poor background, right? And I went and I've studied at Oxford, I've studied at LSE, I've worked in the city, I've worked in media. There are kids I grew up with who are every bit as smart and hardworking and diligent as those guys at Oxford and those guys in the city. And they're struggling to pay the mortgage, right? And I see why that is because this is a systemic issue, right? So get rid of that guilt, get rid of that shame, because that stops you from pushing back. We need to start accepting that life is hard. Life is hard, life is difficult, and you need to do what you can to protect yourselves. But don't feel guilty, don't feel shameful, but don't beat yourself up. Work hard, be there for your friends, be there for your family.
It's a really powerful message. You talk about how it's going to get much worse before it gets better. What do you think is that inflection point that's going to cause it to get better?
So I think people often say, people often expect to see another crash, like a 2008 style crash or a housing crash. I'm 36 now and I've probably read 100 housing crash predictions, none of which have come true in the newspapers. I don't think it goes like that. I think the way that the economy is now, with inequality increasing, whenever asset prices fall, interest rates fall, and that brings asset prices back up. Asset prices seem like basically bulletproof. Nothing can bring them down. I think that will continue. Of course, short term, you will get ups and downs. But because of this new sort of economic management where rates get slashed quickly, it tends to take the pressure off of the asset markets, and it heaps the pressure onto the backs of ordinary families, essentially. That's kind of what you're seeing. Everything, 2008, COVID, very, very different problems. The end result was increased pressure on working families. And the flip side of that, relatively extreme enriching of the very richest. I don't see that changing. There's a group of 5% at the top, especially 1% at the top, that are absolutely creaming it. They're never been richer. They think this is great. I can't help but remember when I was at Oxford. So I recently did a master at Oxford, like in the last, I think it was 17 to 19, saying to the professors, why are you not talking about what's happening in the real world? And they turned around to me and they said, what do you mean? Like, things are getting better, right? We were sitting there literally wearing bow ties in like a wood paneled hall. And you just thought, I realized, there were these two words missing, right? Things are getting better for us. And, for me, I'm a rich person. I get richer every year. It works. This system works very well for me and works for them. Doesn't work for ordinary people. There's no automatic fix here. The pressure is on the people, and it will basically happen when the people demand it. The people have to demand it. But what people will demand will depend on what they believe and the stories they're being told. I'm trying to tell a story here, which is your life is getting worse because inequality has increased massively. The rich are getting much richer and their lives are getting much better. What is positive about that message is that's a fixable problem. We can reverse that flow of wealth. We can get wealth flowing back to ordinary families. We can make ordinary families rich again. We can make ordinary working people be able to buy homes like they could 30, 40, 50 years ago. We could do that back then. We can do it now. We will definitely get change because the pressure will be turned up on the people. The people will end up getting the kind of change they demand. But the kind of change they demand will depend on who wins the battle of stories. I would like to caution people against the naivety of assuming that things definitely get better. Look at the 20th century. Look at how that ended up. And things did get better, but they got a hell of a lot worse first. Things get better for ordinary people because of the blood and sweat of ordinary people working together. If we do that and we push in the right direction, things can get better. But if we get spread apart and we accept negative messages, history tells you really bad things can happen. So
Now, one of the things that you said that I think is very right is people should not be naive, whether it is about the economic situation or I think the most empowering thing is financial literacy. That is the easiest way to level the playing field immediately is become financially literate. Learn what terms like assets mean. How do I acquire assets? How do I invest for the long term? Yeah, 8% may not seem sexy, but compounded, it's a lot sexier than doing nothing.
Man, understanding is powerful, man. One of the first videos I made on my channel was called What is Wealth? And it's just me like walking down my local area saying like, who owns these skyscrapers? Who owns these shops? Asset ownership. Because if you come from a poor background like me, you don't know people that own assets. Especially, in the US, there's a bit more of a culture of like owning stocks and shares. We don't really have that in this country. So people only really own their property. And increasingly, especially if you're from very poor backgrounds, people don't own their own property. So it's about thinking about, listen, who owns these assets? Just understanding something as simple as that can help you on both fronts. Number one, it can help you understand what financial security is about. Like owning assets is a form of security that, I don't need to work because I own assets. If you can understand that, that's powerful. But it also teaches you about how the world works, which is you go to the supermarket, you go to Walmart, somebody owns that Walmart. You know what I mean? You go, the office building you work in, somebody owns it. The restaurants you eat in, everything in the high street is owned. So I think understanding is powerful. It can be a bit upsetting when you realize that it means the situation is bad. But for me, the way I believe it, understanding is always empowering. And I think it not only does it help us protect ourselves, but it builds us as people. And it can help us to build our communities because we can spread that as well. I think understanding, that's why I do what I do. I think if everybody understood the way things were, they wouldn't accept them. So I think more than persuading people, what I see myself as doing is helping people to understand. I think if I do that well enough, the rest will fix itself.
And when we talk about assets, what is Gary's playbook for assets? What should normal people do to start accumulating assets? Is the first step investing, or is the first step owning their own house? Like, where do you see that level?
Step one is managing your income and expenditure. Step one, right? You need to try and simple stuff. You need to try and get the best job you can and try and not spend money on things you don't need. I don't really like saying these things because I'm aware that I'm a wealthy person. These are things that I don't have to worry about. But for an ordinary person, this is step one. Income more than expenditure as much as possible. And I say that in full awareness of how difficult that is for a lot of people. Once you do that, then you can start trying to accumulate. And, here in the UK, you can open a small tax-free savings account and you can start building up stocks and shares. What do you buy? This is probably something you're more experienced to say than me. Personally, at the moment, I have quite a lot of gold. I think gold will do well in the economic weakness that we're coming into. But I also own stocks and shares. I'm a bit light stocks and shares. I also own a fair bit of property. You should be diversified. But I think an ordinary person, I would say, build up a diversified portfolio in your account, looking towards the medium-term goal of trying to buy property, because you got to live somewhere. You know what I mean? And that's the first thing to tick off the box until you have that. And of course, if you're somebody who's young and you're still moving about, it might not work for you at your specific time in life. But I think that is the first thing. Until you have that property, you're insecure. So I would say that's your first thing to get if you can.
It's funny because like here I can see the thumbnail for the YouTube video. It's like, listen now, we are doomed or something.
Yeah.
And of course that's going to get more clicks. That's going to get people to watch. But then like the optimistic side of me is like, wait, we have to end this on a positive note. Like this is very depressing to be like inequality is only going to grow and grow. But then maybe it's a problem that here I am trying to spin a very depressing but real message into a positive way. I find myself very conflicted right now.
I think this is fixable. This is a fixable problem. I do what I do because I think it's fixable. I wrote this book that I wrote because I think this problem is fixable. I think that, but the first step to fixing a problem is realizing you have a problem. You know what I mean? You know, my dad worked for 35 years and was able to support a family on a low income. We could have that now. And listen, since that time, we've invented the internet. Things could be so much better than they are. And I think what gives me hope is that so many people today, you know, and I have people watching my channel, older people, younger people, they want things to be better and they're willing to make sacrifices to push things in a better direction. So but I think if we accept the path that we're on, then we can change the path. We can change the path. And that's why I do what I do, you know. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I make my videos. So I think we need to have a realistic assessment of where we are. Where we are, things are bad, but they can get better, but only if we accept it. So I understand your kind of conflict, which is like, you don't want to spin it too positive because people need to understand the situation if they want to fix it. Listen, tough times make strong people. You know, we got a lot of tough times ahead, but we're in this together. We are in this together. We have things like social media. People who are from places from where I'm from, and it doesn't need to be in the UK. It could be in the US, it could be in Europe, it could be in Japan, anywhere. People from poorer backgrounds who are struggling can see what I'm saying. They can see what you're saying. We can build these communities which can push back and also which we can support each other. You know, sometimes I get down about things, but no, I think that through understanding and through hard work, we can make things better. If we don't do that, then we'll get what we get, but we can push things forward.
For some reason, I feel like this is a talk where I'm going to have to sit for a few hours and process it. I don't quite know how I feel because what you're doing is very macro in my mind. Yeah. You are thinking about big picture solutions for a mass number of people. Mm-hmm. What I do is micro. I want to help individuals now become empowered with their finances, become financially literate, learn how to invest, learn how to save more. And I think both are ultimately needed. Like we need people fighting for each individual person the way I feel like I'm called to do. But we also need people like you who are thinking very big picture about where the world is going. Maybe I'm just not like
I think we need to accept as people that, you know, we are complete people and we can be both like selfish and altruistic at the same time. I don't think there's any conflict at all. I think that we as people have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of our finances. We have to take care of our health. We have to take care of our families. And we have to take care of each other. I think that we as people are big enough to do both things. And I believe that we can. And I think that if we do that, then we can definitely move towards a better future.
When you talk about everyone gathering together and fighting against the system to demand systemic change, what are you advocating that people demand?
Demand a reduction in wealth inequality. Demand that ordinary people increase their wealth year after year. Demand that the average American 50th percentile man or woman in the middle is increasing their wealth generation after generation. That home ownership is increasing. That levels of indebtedness are decreasing. That things like stock and share ownership is increasing in ordinary masses. Because that's what we're losing. That's what we've lost. We've lost asset ownership for ordinary families, what we're increasingly losing. One thing, it's a weird thing in a way that gives me hope, is crazy Brexit situation in the UK. The reason it gives me hope is that at the beginning, both major political parties were super anti-Brexit. But enough people in the country wanted it that both political parties had to turn on it, even if it was something they didn't want to do. I think enough ordinary people start demanding clearly, we want wealth transferring to ordinary people. We want the ordinary people getting richer year after year. We want wealth to start flowing in that direction after decades of flowing in the other direction. If people demand that specific thing clearly enough, I think the politicians will have to give it.
When you quit your job as a trader, is this what you expected you'd be doing years later?
That's a big question. This is something I talk about a lot in the book because it would be super easy for me to say, look, I saw terrible things were going to happen and that's why I quit my job. The truth is, like, it's complicated why I quit my job. I had this stuff in my mind and it didn't sit right with me, but I didn't really know. Like, I remember having a conversation, which I've spoken about in the book, with another trader on the floor, which is just like, do you think we should do something? And he was like, what do you mean? Do you think we should do something? And I was like, about like things getting worse forever and ever. Do you think we'd do something? And he was like, we did that trade. And I was like, yeah, not the trade, do you think we should do something? And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? And I was like, do you think we should do something about like the collapse of our societies? And he was like, we did the trade. And I was trying to get through to him. And he was like, look, you can't stop this. You can't stop this. It's beyond your power as an individual to stop this. And I think that we all have this kind of this voice in our heads that says, that is this conversation, that says, look, we see there are problems and you should do something. But then we have this other voice that says, oh, but you can't stop it, so you can't. So don't worry about it. And that's kind of how we deal with it ourselves. And I think I kind of slowly came to this realization that maybe I, as an individual, it doesn't work like that. It's not Gary Stevenson doesn't come and save society. Of course, I'm not Superman. Society will get better if enough of us do it. So, it's about putting that little bit of energy you have on the right side of the scales. And it's about finding, what works for you. For me, like, I decided to make a YouTube channel. Before that, I was writing articles and I thought, no, I want to talk directly to the people. But, you might think that if you want to do something, the best way for you is going to be a different way. And the people watching might find that for them, something else is a different way. I guess for me, really, it was kind of a journey of rediscovering this idea of community and society, having grown up in a culture of poverty, which kind of forced me into an individualistic mindset. This is one random story in the book. So I know you lived in Japan before. So I also lived in Japan, 2012 to 2014. And karaoke is a big thing in Japan. And I'm quite a good singer, actually.
Oh, nice.
But I hated karaoke. I got very self-conscious. And I went to karaoke with a bunch of guys, like some Westerners, some Japanese guys. And I sang my song and I looked very uncomfortable. Old Japanese man, his name was Hiroshi. He sat me down and he said, what you need to understand about karaoke is it doesn't matter whether you sing well or sing badly. What matters is that your guests have a good time. And it's just a small conversation, but I'd never thought of the world in this way. Like, I was raised in a very competitive place, in a very competitive environment. It was very dog-eat-dog. It was very harsh. I went into trading. And then here's somebody saying, just act to make other people happy. And it was kind of like just a new thing to me and I think I've kind of been on a journey myself of understanding that, that no man is an island, and you can be as successful as you want. And I was very successful and I was very rich, but it didn't make me happy. And I think part of being a complete human is to give and to find your way of giving and finding your way of helping others. And that doesn't mean that you totally let go of yourself. I still trade. I still make money. I haven't given everything away. You can do both. You can live a good life for yourself and you can also give to others. I don't think there's any conflict.
That's very true about karaoke.
Yeah.
My mom is Japanese and my dad's American. So it's always a tug of war where the Japanese side of me wants to put everyone else first and think about how others feel and think about how others would want me to behave. And the American side of me is like, oh, it's all about me.
It's like two opposite extremes of this.
Is.
And I don't think, I love Japan and it taught me a lot. But for me personally, the level of like self-sacrifice that is involved in even things like simple social interactions is for me too much. But I think the level of like selfishness that, for example, I experienced on a place like the trading floor is also too much. And I think that, I guess as someone who is half American, half Japanese, you've probably battled with these kinds of questions yourself. How much do we give and how much do we take? And I think you can do both and you just have to find your space. But I think
your balance.
In my mind, to be a complete person, you have to do a bit of both. And some days you're going to have more to give. Some days you're going to have to take care of yourself.
The podcast is called Erica Taught Me, but today is all about Gary Taught Me. So What do you want people to walk away being able to say, Gary taught me this?
I want people to understand that we have a structural problem in our society. Inequality is getting bigger, and that is impoverishing ordinary families. If we don't stop it, it will get worse. But we have the power, because most of us are ordinary families, to unite, push back, and demand change. Demand enriching of the middle class, demand ordinary people getting richer generation after generation. If we unite, we can do that. I've got the videos out there for people to understand, to educate. I would love people to come and watch them on Gary's Economics, learn, spread. I would love people to read the book, which explains my whole story of coming from a poor background to making this money and understanding the problems with the world. Yeah, I would love people to share my experience, share my journey, and then help me making the future better for ordinary people and ordinary families.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave a review. It really helps support what we're doing. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday on a brand new episode of Erica Taught Me.